In the early 1980s, fear gripped the Pacific Northwest as young women began to disappear without a trace. The bodies of these women were soon found dumped near Seattle's Green River, sparking a manhunt that would span over 2 decades. The killer behind these heinous crimes was careful, methodical, and remained invisible for years, preying on the most vulnerable. Dubbed the Green River Killer, his reign of terror would claim the lives of at least 49 women, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history. But how did this murderer evade justice for so long? And what ultimately led to his capture? In this video, we dive deep into the chilling story of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, and the relentless detectives who refused to give up the hunt. We'll uncover how cutting-edge forensic science and old-school detective work combined to finally unmask this cold-blooded murderer, bringing an end to one of the most disturbing chapters in American true crime. Join us as we explore the dark mind of a serial killer and the dogged pursuit that brought him to justice. It all began in the summer of 1982, when the lifeless bodies of 5 women were discovered near the banks of Seattle's Green River. Each victim had been strangled, their remains dumped in shallow, murky waters. These were young women, many of whom had been living on the edge of society, vulnerable and often overlooked. Their disappearances initially raised little alarm, but the gruesome discoveries soon painted a terrifying picture. A serial killer was at large. The fear in the community grew with each new body found, but the police were faced with a frustrating challenge. Despite the mounting number of victims, clues were scarce, and the Green River seemed to swallow any trace of the killer. The case would soon become one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history, as detectives worked tirelessly to identify the perpetrator behind the growing body count. Little did they know, they were dealing with a predator whose killing spree would last for nearly 2 decades. As the death toll climbed, the Green River Killer remained elusive, blending into the shadows while his victims were left to drift in the currents. But this was only the beginning of a much darker and more twisted story. What made the Green River Killer so terrifying wasn't just the number of victims or the brutality of his crimes. It was his ability to remain invisible for so long. Gary Ridgway lived an unremarkable life, hiding in plain sight. A seemingly ordinary man, he worked as a truck painter, attended church regularly, and even had relationships with women. He was the last person anyone would suspect of being a serial killer, but underneath this facade was a ruthless predator, a man who targeted women on the fringes of society, those whose disappearances were often overlooked. Ridgway knew how to manipulate and control his victims, luring them into his vehicle with false promises of safety. Once inside, there was no escape. Detectives and criminal profilers struggled to piece together a clear profile of the killer. He left little evidence behind, and his methods of disposal, dumping bodies in rivers and remote areas, ensured that vital clues were often washed away or degraded over time. The Green River Killer was methodical, adaptable, and patient, traits that allowed him to evade capture for nearly 20 years. In the early years of the investigation, law enforcement faced countless dead ends. They knew they were dealing with a highly organized and controlled individual, but Ridgway's ability to blend into his surroundings made him nearly impossible to track. It would take a combination of new forensic technologies and old-fashioned detective work to finally reveal the monster behind the mask. As the bodies continued to pile up along the Green River, detectives realized they were in a race against time. Each new victim raised the stakes, and the pressure on law enforcement intensified. A task force was quickly assembled to catch the elusive killer, but despite their efforts, he remained one step ahead. The lack of solid evidence left detectives grasping at straws, and frustration began to mount. Leading the investigation was Detective Tom Jensen, a man who would spend nearly his entire career on the Green River case. Alongside him were other dedicated investigators, some of the best in the field. They scoured crime scenes for clues, interviewed potential witnesses, and painstakingly tried to connect the dots. Yet, despite their best efforts, The killer seemed to vanish into thin air after each murder. The investigative team began to explore new methods, calling in criminal profilers like John Douglas, one of the pioneers of psychological profiling. Douglas's chilling insights into the mind of the Green River Killer helped narrow the suspect pool, but it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. They were hunting a predator who knew how to blend into society, someone who meticulously chose victims and left little trace behind. For years, leads would come and go. Suspects were questioned, some arrested, but none were the right man. Every time detectives felt they were close to cracking the case, the trail would go cold. The weight of the unsolved murders haunted the investigators, pushing them to the brink. But they never gave up. They knew that somewhere out there, the Green River Killer was waiting to strike again. As the Green River investigation dragged on, detectives found themselves facing an unusual and chilling offer of help. From behind the bars of a Florida prison, notorious serial killer Ted Bundy, who was on death row for his own brutal murders, reached out with a proposal. Bundy claimed he could help the investigators get inside the mind of the Green River Killer, offering insights into how this predator might be thinking, choosing his victims, and eluding capture. It was an offer that could not be ignored. Bundy's connection to the case brought a dark twist to the investigation. Detectives were both intrigued and wary. Could one of America's most infamous serial killers really help catch another? With nothing to lose, investigators began a correspondence with Bundy. His suggestions, drawn from his own gruesome experiences, were chillingly accurate. He advised that the Green River Killer would likely revisit his victims' bodies to relive the crimes and satisfy his twisted urges. Bundy even suggested staking out the burial sites, hoping to catch the killer in the act. For a brief moment, it seemed as though this macabre partnership might yield results. Bundy's advice gave the task force new avenues to explore, but even with his insights, the killer continued to evade capture. The detectives staked out crime scenes and followed Bundy's suggestions, but the Green River Killer proved to be even more elusive than they had imagined. In the end, despite Bundy's horrifyingly accurate profile, the killer's identity remained a mystery for years to come. Ted Bundy's involvement left the investigators both shaken and frustrated. The psychological toll of working with one serial killer to catch another weighed heavily on the team, but they knew they couldn't give up. They were still missing the crucial piece of the puzzle, and time was running out as more lives were lost. After nearly 2 decades of false leads and dead ends, the Green River Killer case seemed destined to remain unsolved. Detectives had poured their lives into catching the elusive murderer, but the trail had gone cold. As the years passed, many feared that justice would never come for the dozens of women who had been brutally murdered. But in 2001, everything changed. By this time, forensic science had made leaps in DNA analysis. The advances in technology gave detectives a new tool, something that hadn't been available during the initial investigation. Samples collected from the crime scenes, once thought to be too degraded to provide any answers, were now re-examined with cutting-edge DNA testing. And in a stunning breakthrough, these tests finally pointed to a single man, Gary Ridgway. Ridgway had been a suspect in the early stages of the investigation, but a lack of conclusive evidence had allowed him to slip through the cracks. Now, nearly 20 years later, the DNA evidence conclusively linked him to the murders of several of the Green River victims. It was a moment of both relief and disbelief for the investigators who had spent years chasing a ghost. The arrest of Gary Ridgway in 2001 marked the beginning of the end of one of America's longest-running serial killer investigations. As he was taken into custody, the horrifying truth of his crimes began to unfold. Ridgway confessed to killing at least 49 women, though many believe the actual number is even higher. His ability to evade justice for so long was due in part to his meticulous methods, but ultimately, science caught up with him. This DNA breakthrough, nearly 2 decades in the making, brought long-awaited answers to the families of the victims and closed a dark chapter in American crime history. However, even with the killer behind bars, the full extent of his atrocities would continue to haunt both the detectives and the public. On November 30th, 2001, the news broke that sent shockwaves through the community and across the nation. Gary Ridgway, the man long suspected of being the Green River Killer, had been arrested. The culmination of years of relentless investigation, the arrest marked a pivotal moment in a case that had gripped the public's imagination and instilled fear in countless families. As detectives approached Ridgway's home, they were filled with a mix of hope and trepidation. What they didn't know at that moment was that this seemingly ordinary man, who had lived among them for so long, was harboring dark secrets. After his arrest, Ridgway was taken in for questioning, and it was during these interrogations that he revealed the chilling depths of his depravity. Ridgway initially denied his involvement, but as the detectives laid out the overwhelming DNA evidence and the connections to the unsolved cases, his facade began to crumble. What followed was a disturbing confession, where Ridgway openly admitted to the murders of numerous women, victims he had lured, tortured, and ultimately killed. He described in cold detail how he would often revisit the scenes of his crimes, even after they had been discovered. His confession sent shivers down the spines of those who had dedicated their careers to the investigation. Ridgway's callous demeanor and lack of remorse shocked the detectives. He justified his actions with twisted logic, revealing a mind that had long eluded capture. He spoke of the victims as if they were mere objects, devoid of identity and humanity. As details of his confessions emerged, the chilling reality of his crimes became clearer. Ridgway had not only taken lives, but had also shattered families, leaving behind a legacy of pain and loss. The arrest of Gary Ridgway didn't just bring an end to a manhunt, it began a new chapter of horror as the full scope of his actions came to light. The community breathed a sigh of relief as law enforcement finally unmasked the monster who had haunted them for so long. But for the families of the victims, the emotional toll was just beginning. As the world learned more about the man behind the Green River murders, they were left grappling with the question, how could someone live a double life, hiding such darkness in plain sight? Gary Ridgway's confessions shocked the nation, but as the details unfolded, they raised a haunting question. How many women had he truly murdered? Initially, Ridgway confessed to killing 49 women, but he claimed that the actual number was much higher, possibly over 70. Each revelation sent waves of terror through the community, as more families faced the grim possibility that their loved ones might be among the unaccounted victims. Ridgway's chilling method of operation became clearer during his confessions. He targeted vulnerable women, many of whom were involved in sex work or struggling with addiction. He would lure them into his truck with promises of money or a ride, only to turn on them in a horrific display of violence. His casual recounting of these crimes painted a picture of a man devoid of empathy, treating the murders as mere statistics rather than the tragic loss of human life. What made Ridgway's confessions even more unsettling was his insistence that he enjoyed killing. He described how it gave him a sense of power and control, a disturbing admission that underscored his psychopathic tendencies. As he detailed the acts of violence he committed, the investigators listened in horror, grappling with the reality that they were dealing with a serial killer who had eluded justice for so long. To assist law enforcement in identifying potential victims, Ridgway agreed to help locate the remains of some women he had killed. This chilling cooperation came with a disturbing caveat. He would only do so in exchange for a plea deal that spared him the death penalty. The detectives who had spent years seeking justice for the victims faced an ethical dilemma. How far would they go to secure the truth and bring closure to the families? The impact of Ridgway's confessions rippled through the community, reigniting the grief and trauma experienced by the families of the victims. As more names were revealed and stories emerged, the chilling reality of his crimes became undeniable. Ridgway's willingness to talk about his deeds left the world grappling with the darkness that can hide beneath a seemingly normal exterior. Ultimately, the full scope of Ridgway's actions might never be known. The horror of his confessions serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the depths of human depravity. As investigators worked tirelessly to identify the victims, the community faced a painful reckoning. How could such evil exist among them? As the trial of Gary Ridgway began in 2003, the eyes of the nation were glued to the courtroom. The gravity of the charges against him, 49 counts of murder, set the stage for a case that would not only expose the depths of his depravity, but also raise questions about justice and punishment. Families of the victims filled the courtroom, seeking closure and answers as they confronted the man who had shattered their lives. The prosecution laid out a chilling case, detailing Ridgway's confessions and the evidence that linked him to the murders. They painted a portrait of a cold, calculating killer who preyed on vulnerable women and then disposed of their bodies as if they were mere trash. But as the trial progressed, the defense presented an unexpected twist. They argued that Ridgway's actions stemmed from a severe mental illness. Ridgway himself remained composed during the proceedings, exhibiting a disturbing calmness that unsettled many. He expressed no remorse for his actions, which only deepened the anger and sorrow felt by the families of his victims. They had waited so long for justice, and the thought of this man potentially evading the ultimate punishment was unbearable. In a shocking turn of events, Ridgway struck a plea deal with the prosecution. In exchange for pleading guilty to the murders, he agreed to provide detailed information about the locations of some of the victims' remains, a concession that would spare him the death penalty. This decision ignited a firestorm of outrage among the victims' families and the public, who felt that justice was being compromised for the sake of expediency. The court accepted the plea, and Ridgway was sentenced to 48 years in prison, a life term that would ensure he would never see the outside world again. While some viewed the sentence as a form of justice, many felt it was a betrayal to the memory of the women he had killed. How could a man who had taken so many lives receive a sentence that allowed him to live? Ridgway's trial and subsequent sentencing became a catalyst for discussions about the death penalty and the moral complexities of justice in America. The families of the victims were left to grapple with their grief, feeling that true justice had been elusive. As Ridgway was led away, the weight of the unsolved cases and the lives lost lingered in the courtroom, a haunting reminder of the darkness that had unfolded in their community. This chapter of Ridgway's story serves as a stark illustration of the complexities of the legal system and the enduring pain faced by the families of the victims. The question of whether justice had truly been served hung in the air, echoing long after the courtroom doors had closed. The arrest and conviction of Gary Ridgway marked a significant turning point in the Green River Killer case, but the scars left on the community and the families of his victims would take far longer to heal. For many, the resolution of the case came with mixed emotions: relief at the capture of the man who had wreaked havoc for so long, but also deep sorrow and anger over the lives lost. The families of Ridgway's victims faced an unbearable reality. They had spent years searching for answers, grappling with the uncertainty of their loved ones' fates. With the knowledge that their daughters, sisters, and friends had been brutally murdered, many were left to navigate the painful journey of grief while also seeking justice. The trials and tribulations of the investigation had taken a toll, but the truth of what had happened to their loved ones was an added burden they had to carry. In the aftermath, support groups and community organizations emerged to help those affected by the tragedy. Families sought solace in one another, sharing their stories and experiences as they worked through their grief together. The Green River Killer case also spurred discussions about the need for better support systems for victims of crime and their families, highlighting the often overlooked impact of violence on communities. Moreover, the Green River murders led to a broader awareness of the vulnerabilities faced by women in dangerous situations, particularly those involved in sex work or struggling with addiction. Activists and community leaders began advocating for better protections and resources for at-risk populations, aiming to prevent further tragedies. Ridgway's crime served as a stark reminder of the need for vigilance and compassion in society. While Ridgway was behind bars, his legacy of terror lingered in the community. The haunting question of how a seemingly ordinary man could commit such heinous acts left a shadow over the Seattle area. Many residents remained on edge, realizing that the darkness of human nature could manifest in the most unexpected places. As time went on, the memory of the victims became a rallying cry for change. Annual vigils and memorials were held to honor those who had lost their lives to the Green River Killer. These gatherings served as a reminder that they were more than just statistics. They were loved individuals whose lives were tragically cut short. In this way, the story of Gary Ridgway transcended his individual crimes, becoming a catalyst for a movement toward awareness and prevention. The families of the victims, though forever marked by their loss, turned their pain into purpose, ensuring that the memory of their loved ones would not fade into obscurity. The Green River Killer case not only brought justice for the victims, but also transformed the landscape of criminal investigations in profound ways. As law enforcement grappled with the complexities of tracking one of America's most notorious serial killers, the need for innovative approaches in profiling and forensic science became abundantly clear. One of the key lessons learned from the Green River investigation was the importance of psychological profiling. The collaboration with criminal profilers, like John Douglas, opened new avenues for understanding the mind of a killer. Douglas's insights into Ridgway's behavior helped detectives focus their efforts and provided valuable strategies for identifying patterns in his crimes. This case highlighted the necessity of integrating psychology into investigative techniques, which has since become a cornerstone of modern criminal profiling. Furthermore, the advancements in forensic science, particularly in DNA analysis, played a crucial role in solving the case. The ability to re-examine old evidence with new technology allowed detectives to connect Ridgway to multiple murders decades after the crimes were committed. This breakthrough not only brought closure to the victims' families, but also demonstrated the evolving nature of forensic methods. Today, law enforcement agencies utilize sophisticated DNA profiling techniques, ensuring that even the most cold cases can potentially be revisited and solved. The Green River Killer case also emphasized the need for better interagency communication and collaboration. The scale of the investigation required cooperation between local, state, and federal agencies, paving the way for improved protocols in handling serial crimes. This case served as a model for future investigations, illustrating the importance of sharing information and resources to effectively combat complex criminal activities. Additionally, the public response to the Green River murders prompted discussions about the safety of vulnerable populations, particularly women in precarious situations. The case raised awareness about the dangers faced by sex workers and individuals struggling with addiction, leading to advocacy for better protection and support systems. Law enforcement and community organizations began working together to create safer environments and resources for at-risk individuals, hoping to prevent future tragedies. As the Green River Killer case came to a close, it left behind a legacy of lessons learned. The advances in profiling and forensics, along with a renewed focus on victim support, transformed the way law enforcement approached serial crimes. The story of Gary Ridgway serves as a reminder that even in the darkest chapters of human history, there's an opportunity for growth, change, and a commitment to justice. As we reflect on the harrowing story of the Green River Killer, we are left with a sense of both resolution and lingering uncertainty. Gary Ridgway's capture and conviction brought an end to a dark chapter in American crime history, but the echoes of his actions continue to resonate. While Ridgway is behind bars, many questions remain unanswered, questions that haunt the families of the victims and the investigators who dedicated their lives to solving the case. One of the most chilling aspects of Ridgway's confessions is the possibility that he may have killed many more women than the confirmed 49. With his claims of over 70 victims, the fear remains that there are still families left in the dark, grappling with the unknown fates of their loved ones. Each unidentified victim is a stark reminder of the horror that unfolded along the Green River, and the ongoing search for closure continues to weigh heavily on the community. Furthermore, the psychological impact of Ridgway's crimes lingers on. The families of his victims carry the scars of loss, grief, and unanswered questions. Their stories serve as a powerful reminder of the real human cost behind the statistics, highlighting the importance of empathy and support for those affected by violent crime. The Green River Killer case also leaves us with important lessons about the need for vigilance in our communities. It prompts us to consider how we can better protect vulnerable individuals and ensure that their voices are heard. By raising awareness about the dangers faced by at-risk populations, we can strive to create a safer environment for everyone. As we conclude this journey into the depths of one man's depravity and the relentless pursuit of justice, we recognize the profound impact of the Green River Killer case on society. It has spurred advancements in criminal profiling, forensic science, and community advocacy, all of which aim to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. Ultimately, while Gary Ridgway's story may have reached its end, the fight for justice and the memory of the victims lives on. Their lives mattered, and their stories deserve to be told. As we honor their memories, we are reminded that the pursuit of justice is a continuous journey, a journey that requires our commitment, compassion, and vigilance. Thank you for joining us as we explored the chilling legacy of the Green River Killer. We hope this video has shed light on the dark complexities of human nature and the unwavering spirit of those who seek truth and justice.